Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about boundaries, but more specifically, why some people think that they're shit at setting boundaries. And I say shit just because there's there's many things that can go on to stop on someone from setting effective boundaries. But I think part of the problem as well is that there is so much information out there, especially online and on the social media space around what boundaries are, what boundaries aren't, where you should have boundaries. But there's a lot of things that can go into making it difficult for people to feel like they can actually start to implement and establish boundaries. And really, at the core of what a boundary is it's an invitation that you're basically extending to the people in your life to define the relationship in a respectful and healthy way for both people. You're establishing limits on the type of behavior that you feel is appropriate. You're communicating that you're worthy of respect, that you trust yourself to say no, that you have limits on your time, your money, your emotions, your energy, your space, your resources, you know, that you won't be taken for granted in that sense. And basically, when we're communicating this to the people in our life, whether it's friends, family, or in our intimate relationships, really what we're trying to establish is the ground rules for us to have a healthy relationship. We don't want to be able to maintain a relationship based on, having to betray ourselves. And I know that's a bit of a loaded term, but deny how you feel, overextend, become a martyr or self-sacrificing so that the entire foundation of the relationship in general is based on the premise that you're constantly going to give and give and give without limit. And it makes it very, very difficult for it to be mutually beneficial. But there's a lot of reasons why people can struggle with this. And you might be reading these bits and pieces of information online. And it's boundaries this and boundaries that, and here's 10 signs you don't have boundaries, and here's 10 signs that you need to get your finger out of your arse and communicate something. But there's a lot that can go on that, under the hood for people that are, very intelligent, but maybe just struggle with the actual implementation of the information that they're reading. One of the big ones that I see working with people, and usually the people that are struggling with boundary setting at the beginning, I often find that guilt is a major, major factor. They feel bad about putting themselves first or maybe saying no. There's a massive fixation on the other person, the context of what's going on with that person, how that person's going to cope, how they're going to feel. There's a potential fear of conflict, the person getting angry with them or being upset with them, fear what the person might think, fear losing face or social standing, if it's in a peer group or a friendship group, fear of consequence or repercussion. Maybe there's manipulative behavior going on here. Maybe it's with a partner, they might withhold affection, or with a family member, you might get seeing your nieces, your nephews, or, whatever it is. There's loads of other things that can come under this. There's the fear of the actual relationship itself ending because the person has been so forthright in saying that it's their way or the highway. So there's a lot of things that can come on. The fear of rejection, fear of conflict, as I said, that fear is a big, big part of it. The guilt in a lot of ways can come back to conditioning. It can come back to, even behavior that was modeled in the family of origin, always putting other people first. It might have been like your survival strategy, how you had moments of connection in your family, being of service to other people, maybe being rewarded for putting other people before yourself, maybe always being the go-to person for people in your family. It might have been how your friendship groups functioned, growing up, you constantly overextending, you constantly being available, setting that precedent. So when you think about actually putting yourself first, the fear of actually doing that becomes very great. It's nearly like this belief that you're doing something wrong. You might have moral judgments on it, that would be really selfish, or that it's really inconsiderate not to see the other people first, or there could be religious elements going on in there as well in terms of who you need to be as a person and how you should act. And the thing is, like, there's so many things that can come on this as well. Often if we talk about growing up in violent households or we talk about fear of confrontation, there's so much more that can go into that conversation. It's important to keep this in mind if this is resonating with you. And obviously, I apologize if this is bringing anything up for you. But if you grew up in a very volatile environment, or you were afraid, like it wasn't safe for you to ask to get your needs met, or anytime you did get your needs met, maybe you were demeaned or put down, or there was a physical threat, or that might have happened in your friendship groups. You might have been humiliated or mocked, or there could have been loads of different reasons as to why you never felt safe to use your voice. And the thing is, like, your nervous system remembers that. And even as an accomplished adult, that's sometimes the part of the self that can be activated in that moment. That's the part that can come forward. You might feel like that small inner child, feeling really vulnerable, very overwhelmed, not resourced to be able to speak up and ask for what you actually need in that moment. But, it's important to actually remember that it's not just your mental awareness of what you need to do. There's also that feeling of internal safety. There's also that feeling of self trust. People that are really struggling with self esteem, really struggling with their confidence, communication can be a majorly tricky area for them. And also, without going down the rabbit hole talking about trauma, like there's so many other ways trauma can impact on people as well. And I could spend literally, I would say, 2 or 3 episodes if we really flesh this out and start to, look at all the reasons why people stay stuck. But obviously, trauma is a major, major factor. That can put people into a chronic freeze response. Even the thought of any potential confrontation can lead to a massive anxiety episode. And often, what you'll find in these scenarios is people going through patterns of avoidance. And it could just be avoiding certain people. It could be avoiding speaking up. It could be avoiding asking for what they need or what they want. It could be avoiding holding people accountable. And when you think about boundary setting at its core, if you've communicated to somebody very clearly, what you will and will not tolerate, and you've said to them, look, if you do this, then X, Y, and Z is going to happen. I'm not going to be in your company anymore, or whatever the consequence is, and they go on ahead and they violate the boundary, and you don't follow through on it. That is a major, major issue, because then that person has no incentive to change. And that's where all this other stuff about the nervous system and the fear starts to come in, because you then have to implement it. Whether or not you've got feelings or judgments around the guilt, this is about learning to shift perspective back to the self, to take care of the self, to regulate your emotions, to trust yourself, to remember why the boundary was important. And obviously, therapy and coaching can be massively impactful and important in this. And that's why I'm saying have a bit of space, or have a bit of grace and compassion with yourself when you're reading this online and you're looking at these lists and you're looking at this information and you're like, well, why is this not sticking with me? Why am I finding this so difficult? Because contextually speaking too, we can't write broad content for every scenario. And obviously, it's very different when you're dealing with somebody in your family, you're dealing with a partner, you're dealing with a friend. Like, the premise is very similar, but it's massively different, because there's different levels of attachment. There's different elements going on in the depth of the relationship. There's different amounts of energy invested in the relationship. There's different power dynamics going on in each of them relationships. Also, some people are in abusive or manipulative scenarios. Sometimes there's the fear of violence. Sometimes there's all this other stuff that's going on. So it's not just a black and white scenario. One of the other major hurdles that I think comes up for people is being a bit wishy-washy when they're communicating their boundaries, or not communicating them clearly, directly, or in some cases at all. Some people will just assume that the person is going to think or feel the way that they think or feel, and that somehow the penny is eventually going to drop. You've probably seen this 100 times. People aren't mind readers. And I think sometimes where the trap is for some people, they fall into this belief that there's maybe this unspoken agreement, or this unspoken understanding between people, that you should treat people a certain way, but not everybody thinks and feels like that. And often when we start to look at behavior, we can start to see the differences in the way people are being treated. um Again, just circling back to the guilt. um like, guilt is a really, really tricky emotion to sit with, because it's this idea that you've done something that's wrong. And again, if you grew up with this behavior of being the martyr, being the people pleaser, and that was all that was really modeled for you in the family of origin, in terms of a diffusal strategy or as a connection strategy, this is where you then have to go back and unpack elements of your condition. You have to start looking at, you know, what's working, what's not working. And part of this as well, when we think about avoidance, we can look at a lot of things in the family of origin in terms of what was modeled. How was conflict modeled, for example? That you may have grew up where there was maybe massive arguments. Doesn't necessarily mean that there needed to be violent, but it could have been very intimidating. It could have been very scary. You might have seen one parent completely placate, people please the other parent. That could have brought up this fear about rocking the boat, about being seen, about asking for your needs to be met. It could also fed into this idea of walking on eggshells around people, putting yourself at the back of the queue. And as an adult, what can happen is that can lead into you then avoiding difficult conversations. And this is where the self denial starts to come in, betraying how you really think and feel, pushing those needs down. And that feeds into this people pleasing and placating strategy, because it's when I say it's like a survival strategy in that sense, that's where it's coming from, because it's another way that you learn to navigate those interpersonal relationships. But one of the things that we have to learn about adult relationships is that we cannot avoid direct conversations, hard conversations. They have to happen. We have to learn how to work on the communication. We have to lean into those conversations. Everything that we take from that then is feedback. And one of the other major things that I just want to circle back to and talk on, is just the point of focus when we, like when I was talking about the boundary setting. Like often people that struggle with people pleasing, like I've said this on one of the other episodes, they're often massively empathetic. They're hugely compassionate. They are usually good people. They do care for the people that they have around them. They do like they take care of them. They do like they do things for them. But it's when there's that complete neglect of the self, when it's chronic, when you're saying yes when you really want to be saying no. And only the people that are listening to this that have had that experience will know exactly what I'm talking about. And the thing is, in that scenario, what I want you to kind of remember is that you have lived your life, for the majority of the time, navigating these relationships, primarily focusing on the other person's needs, what they're going to think, what they're going to feel. And again, we're potentially mind reading and assuming here how they're going to respond, how they're going to react, and then over fixating on the context of what's going on and why you need to be doing what you're doing. But you need to even move into a place of congruence, like, and being totally true to yourself. You have to factor in the self. Like, you have to look at the impact and what is this going to take me away from? What is this going to do to me in terms of my time, my emotions, my energy? Do I actually physically want to do this, or is there another reason as to why I'm doing this? Am I doing this because there's avoidance here? And the thing is, like, you need to be compassionate with yourself as you're starting to, dip your toes into this space of setting boundaries with people. Even communicating at the beginning can be really difficult, especially if you've had difficult experiences speaking up with people in the past. But also the flip side of this, and I think this is an important conversation that I want to just kind of include in this. Obviously, I'll talk more about boundaries going forward, but when we communicate boundaries to people, say we've lived most of our life and we've been really pleasant, really agreeable, would do anything for anyone. I hear this very regularly with clients. Oh, it would always be decided that I can't even speak now. Defined as like the good girl, the good one, the kind one, do anything for anybody. Oh, schwile good, schwile good. Like, that's all well and good, but again, look at the precedent that we're setting there in terms of what people can expect from me. And it's setting yourself up for like overextending behavior. If you're constantly setting that norm of always being available, always been accessible, not allowing yourself to say no, then if we think about the process of change and we think about, right, every relationship has within it a sort of balance or homeostasis or like a norm, like this idea of how this relationship functions. So I'll give you an example, like say even two friends, and it's always one of the friends that sets up the, let's say, the coffee dates or whatever it is, but it's always this one friend that is initiating things, or just say it's a really one-sided friendship. And then now suddenly this person has decided they change and has spoken up or has decided that they're not going to be the person instigating. Well, what has happened in the norm is now there's a different element of behavior. So both people in that system have to respond because there's an unknown element in the system. So when we think about this in terms of like even families, like if somebody changes their role or their stance in a family, like in terms of how they're communicating or how they're responding, the whole system goes into flux because there's something new here that wasn't there. There's no predictive behavior as to how this is going to be navigated. That can bring up massive anxiety, it can bring up anger, it can bring up fear, it can bring up awkwardness. Some people just don't know how to address those situations. Now, when we think about this from the process of boundaries, especially when we're communicating boundaries to people that we love and we want relationships with, as a human being, if we assume the best, we on some level want to believe that they want to continue this relationship with us. They might fuck things up because the norm has been there for that long in the relationship. Say it's somebody that's been around for a while. And it's important at times to extend them a bit of compassion and a bit of patience. And this is where your boundary with yourself comes in. That your boundaries don't have to become black and white walls to lock everybody out. We move with the people as they're moving with us. When we feel safe, we can relax our boundaries. When we feel respected, we can start to relax our boundaries. But if we're dealing with somebody that's not safe or is the opposite of that, naturally we communicate our boundaries, we stand over them. There's consequences if they're violated. We take care of the self. But in saying that, I'm just saying some people struggle to adapt. There could be learning difficulties, there could be age, differences. There could be loads of different things going on. You know, they might just be emotionally struggling with a change in the relationship. They might find this personality change, you know, especially if you're becoming more congruent and they haven't seen this side of you because it's been repressed or denied for so long. Part of what I'm saying is just extend a wee bit of compassion. Recognize that we want a mutually beneficial relationship for both of us. We do care about these people. We want these people in our life. And that's why I think, on a level, a boundary is an invitation for the person to be a part of our life. We're inviting them to treat us in a respectful way. Obviously, we're going to stand over it. It's not just, oh, here, I'm just going to invite you to treat me well. We're going to make sure that they do, because we're going to stand over our boundaries. We're going to enforce them. But at the end of the day, it is an invitation, because that person can tell us they fuck off. That person can tell us that they're not going to play ball. That person could guilt trip us or get angry or push back. And even some of the pushback that can happen, like, I'm not saying it's always conscious. Sometimes it's that person still trying to get their needs met and they're going about it in the wrong way. And it's not they totally justify or undermine what they're doing, but sometimes this is them testing the certainty of what you're trying to do. And this is why I'm saying people fall in that trap when there's guilt, low self esteem, lacking in confidence, avoiding behavior, not really trusting in their ability to like follow through on what they've communicated. And if people feel that there's an ounce of doubt, you know, they are going to test, you know, where the line is. And that's why sometimes people can fall many times in the early stages of boundary setting, but it's important that you stay with it. Even if you've slipped up once or twice, it's important that you stay with it, because we're establishing a new norm. And I just hope that makes sense for anybody that's listening here. It's not always just a case of one and done. Sometimes you have really supportive people around you, and it's like, yep, right, oh, get it. Totally understand why that's necessary for you. I'm on board. Other times it's not really the case. You know, sometimes in dynamics where you're communicating maybe boundaries with parents or extended family or different people or in-laws, whatever it is, it's fucking hard. And that's why I'm saying, like, if we assume the best intentions, but we also stay consistent on it, you know, it's not about us trying to coerce people. It's not about us trying to force people to think like us or behave like us or treat us in a certain way all the time. We're basically communicating, you know, an appropriate level of how we want to be treated to feel respectful and safe. And I think this is important too, because sometimes boundaries and the communication of boundaries, and this, I don't know if this is controversial for some people, but I feel like it's important too. More and more people are going to therapy. More and more people are learning through the therapeutic space that, you know, it's important to take care of yourself. It's important to communicate. It's important to communicate your needs, speak up, you know, not to fall into assumption, not to fall into mind reading. Communicate very directly and clearly your boundary, and that's all well and good. However, I think sometimes when people establish that they're going to communicate a boundary, they leverage it in a way that this is the only way that things can be. And I think, like what I was saying there about softening in with the people that you actually love and recognizing that it might take them a wee bit of time to catch up. Obviously, context is important here. I'm not talking about abusive systems, just in case this is like bringing anything up for people. But it's saying a hypothetical scenario where all things are equal considered, you know, we're just communicating that certain things need to change for needs to be met. The thing is, the intention behind the boundary isn't to control somebody. It's rooted in respect. We're not trying to get that person to think and behave like us, or just to start doing what we want at the cost of that, like them losing out and meeting their needs. You know, we're not like, through the communication of the boundary being communicated, we're not telling other people what they can or can't do within the scope of their space or their life either. We're not using our boundaries to like force growth in other people. I want to make sure that I communicate this the right way. Like, we don't want to like communicate boundaries in a way that's going to feel oppressive, that's going to feel manipulative, that's going to feel demeaning, or dictatorial. You know, like, you don't want the communication of your boundaries to feel like it's a hard sense of like, this is a rule for life. This is the only way things could be, and I'm going to tell you the way it is, and you're just going to fall in line because these are my boundaries, and this is the way it is, and this is how you should do things, and this is how I do them, so you should do them too. And there's an element of coercion and manipulation that can come in there, and it's also very fucking demanding. And the thing is, that's not boundary setting. That's not. But I'm not saying that this is like common out there, but maybe this will resonate with people that have had difficult conversations with people in their life that have maybe been to therapy. And they're like, where is this behavior coming out of? You know, they're overzealous in their communication of boundaries. It's nearly to the point where like people are getting blasted. Like, long-standing friendships or maybe dynamics that were in place that weren't great but needed to change have now just become completely overwhelmed with this other swinging behavior. And that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes we need to soften on that. Sometimes we actually need to meet people where they're also at. As much as we might feel like we're the star of our own show because it's our life and all the rest of it, like there is other people just trying to get by in their life as well. They're living their lives. They're fucking running around with dysregulated nervous systems. Well, some people, they're dealing with a lot of fucking stuff. They've got their life stressors, they've all got stuff going on. And if we want to keep them in our life, if we want this healthy, beneficial relationship, we can extend them a bit of compassion. We can have a bit of patience. We can also have a bit of patience and compassion with ourselves. Anyway, so I thought that was important to put in. Genuinely, boundaries is such a broad topic, but I wanted to kind of point out that that was one of the reasons that I felt that people would struggle to, was talking about that in the sense of like the judgments around guilt, the fear of speaking up, the fear of consequence, dysregulated nervous systems, impact of trauma, impact of abuse, unhealthy modeled behavior growing up, not having an actual template of what healthy boundary setting looks like. And as I say, you might read loads and loads and loads and loads of things online about what they look out for and stuff, but when you're actually in that situation and the person's communicating with you, you're now in conflict because you've tried to speak up. It can be overwhelming. You could find yourself going into a freeze. You could find your fight or flight active very, very quickly. You might know how to respond. Even your non-verbal body language. That's something that I feel people have to work on, even in the therapeutic space. How to maintain eye contact. What way they're holding themselves, head up, chest up, open posture. Grounding themselves. There's a lot that can go into learning to be an effective communicator, but also noticing when people are on that other side of the spectrum where they have no interest in being respectful and they want to be manipulative, and that's maybe where you're getting the guilt trip and the coercive behavior. And you have to learn how to respond to that. And if you've never had that modeled, or if you've never been in the therapeutic space talking about it and you just feel overwhelmed, you don't know what they say, like you can still communicate. Look, I understand what you're saying. I can hear that this isn't easy for you, but no's no. I'm not going to be available. I'm not going to change my mind. I feel very differently how you feel, and that's okay. And you're also taking back your power in that scenario. You're not trying to take responsibility for how they're feeling and in response to your boundaries. But that's a bit different to what I was saying earlier, where the person is just kind of like, these are my boundaries, and everybody needs to toe the fucking line. That's like that can be oppressive in that sense. That's not rooted in healthy boundary setting. But the other side of the coin is, if it's that you're not falling in that trap for the people that struggle with guilt, for the people that struggle with the fear of what other people think, or the fear of rejection, or the fear of the relationship ending, that you're not falling in that space of, I have to attend to this person. I have to help them regulate. I have to make them okay with my boundary and explain why and give them 90 dozen justifications as to why I've had to do this. Like, that's not also your responsibility. But there's a bit of nuance that comes into this, and I thought it was important to kind of talk about it. Um, just on that, like, you might be wondering, like, how the fuck do I know if I need boundaries? Well, how can I put it? Like, some people overshare, and again, there's loads of intersections where this can start to like overlap on the other things, like with trauma and different things. But you know, you might overshare too much with people. You might, fall into this pattern of like not putting boundaries on your time or your energy or your money or your resources just give without restraint. You could also be very, very impulsive. You might find that you become just manipulated with people. You might totally mold yourself into what another person needs you to be in order to feel seen or connected. You might deny your feelings, you might deny your thoughts, you might deny your opinions, even your core values in order to fucking keep somebody else happy. Like your whole fucking mode of operating has now become centered around what this person's happiness or thoughts or feelings are at the cost of your own. Um, you let people disrespect you, you let people degrade you, you let people get away with absolutely appalling behavior that they shouldn't without any consequence, without acknowledging it, without speaking up, without in any way, shape, or form holding them responsible, choosing consciously to ignore this. You maybe let people come into your personal space, let them away with behavior that they shouldn't, that includes somebody touching you without your permission. And obviously, when we're talking about physical boundaries and sexual boundaries and stuff, that's a big one as well. And also ignoring inappropriate behavior, feeling like you have to ignore inappropriate behavior. If that's something that's coming off you, then if you're dealing with people like that around you, that is a sign that you do need to put boundaries out there. Um, as like one of the big things, like in terms of knowing that you need boundaries, is if you're constantly overextending and giving the other people without any restraint or limitation. So it could be time, money, your emotional space, your emotional bandwidth. That could even just be sitting on the phone for hours and hours and hours with somebody because you feel like you have to be there for them because they'll not be able to cope without you, even though that hasn't been asked of you, or you don't have the space, or you've got other things that you should be attending to at that point in time, or you're doing it even though you're resentful or frustrated that you're doing it. Sexual boundaries, energetic boundaries, just basically allowing people to take what they want from you, letting them do absolutely whatever they want at your expense. Or it could be as simple as even boundaries around your life, or how you're going to move forward. Now that can be with, like, obviously when you get a bit older, it's a bit different when you de-enmesh from your family, but letting other people dictate or tell you what way to live your life, control you, tell you how to show up in the world, how you should be, how you should think, how you should behave, what you should believe. um and he look, just even within that, I said it earlier about not communicating boundaries. That's also a really, really big thing. Like, as expectations and assumptions, thinking other people will just think and feel the way you think and feel. Some people don't feel guilty, taken from other people. Some people do not feel remorse at fucking over other people. Some people do not feel any degree of awkwardness, letting somebody run themselves under the ground. And if you don't communicate your needs, if you don't even know what your needs are, but if you don't even communicate your needs, we're not even extending that person an opportunity to meet you halfway and start the work and build on the relationship. But you need to be able to communicate your needs. This is why you have to, like, define your boundaries with people. Um, but I like you can't, like, you literally can't ignore your boundaries, because it will show up even in your physiology. It will show up in your interpersonal relationships. You will feel overwhelmed. You feel like you've no space. You'll feel like you've no time for yourself. Even in your more intimate relationships, like saying like it's with your family, you could feel completely smothered, enmeshed, overwhelmed, controlled, restricted, like you've no freedom. You might constantly feel drained and, spent emotionally because you're constantly giving to other people, and like that's a form of self-neglect. You have to come back and take care of yourself. You have personal power. You're in control. You can make changes. You're not a powerless person in this world. It can feel like you're very overwhelmed because you mightn't feel resourced right now, but you can make changes here. You can absolutely turn this around. But you need to find these places where you're you need to make the changes, like identify key areas where boundaries need to be implemented, where they're currently being violated, tune under the fucking body, tune under how it makes you feel when this happens, recognizing that this needs to change. And anytime feelings of guilt come up in the process of communicating and coming back to, well, why is this necessary? If I respect this person, all I'm asking for in turn is that they meet me halfway and respect me the same way. But also understanding that if they don't honor or respect the boundary, or they violate the boundary, how you will respond, what action you're going to take. And also looking at the variables, we're looking at what you can control. We're not factoring in, focusing on them, how they're going to respond, what they're going to do. Unless it's to do with the violation of that boundary, we're only looking at how are we going to respond, what are we going to communicate, and how are we going to respond. That could be disengaging, it could be putting limits on time, it could be withdrawn from them, it might be ending the relationship, ending the contact. There's loads of different consequences that you can implement. But fear, guilt are two of the major, major big hurdles for stopping people from doing it. And the thing is, like, you need the ability to set boundaries to take care of yourself. It's so important for your self esteem. It's so important for your well being, you know, and your confidence, your trust in yourself, to take care of yourself, to have time for yourself, for your own quality of life. Everything in your life will begin to shift when you step into that personal power, when you start to communicate, when you start to trust yourself to speak up. Um, may not be easy. As I said, you might fail a couple of times. It might go fucking tits up. People might give you bad reactions, but look, it can be done, and it is done often. People turn their life around. Even if they've been in a pattern of chronic people pleasing for most of their life, they can turn this around. I see it every day with my clients, and I'm like, it's one of the things I buzz the most of, is seeing them step under their power. So I hope this resonates with you. I hope it helps in any way, shape, or form. If it does, drop me a wee DM. Let me know what you thought, or if you've any thoughts for any more podcasts. I just want to say thanks again. Thanks so much for listening. Share this with a friend if you could think it might help them, or hi, hi. So thanks again for listening.